Hi, I'm Milena. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to my October wrap-up. I read 13 books last month. Compared to my other wrap-ups, we have quite a bit of classics. I have these three and I have a few that I read on ebook or audiobook. Let's start with the short story that everyone read because of the Netflix series, and that is The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. This is a short story that's really short, it's 30 pages long, and it follows a man who visits the Usher family in their very gothic house. He walks into this house and the first thing he notices is how the atmosphere of the house could influence someone who lives there. When he walks into this house, he meets one of the men of the Usher family, and then he is a witness to the Usher family falling apart. Parts of that short story is really, I think, beautifully interwoven in the series, which we did watch. Not gonna review the series here, but boy, and I did like it, and I did really like how they used, especially I think, both language as well in that series. They used a few poems of his as well, but I think the core was really beautifully portrayed. This is a short story that I do want to read again because it went a little bit over my head. I read previous short stories by Edgar Allan Poe and I do really enjoy his prose. I don't think I gave it a star rating. I will probably give it a star rating on a reread. For October, I read Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, and surprisingly, I really enjoyed this. I say surprisingly because I'm not the biggest Dickens fan, but I gave this a glowing 4 stars. We follow Pip, who grows up with his sister and her husband Joe, who is a blacksmith, and then he is asked to entertain or to play with Miss Havisham's ward. Miss Havisham is like the lady of the place that he lives. In his interactions with those people, he starts to dream about the concept of becoming a gentleman. And we follow Pip throughout his rise within class. We follow Pip throughout his trials and tribulations in trying to become that gentleman that he has dreamt of. One thing I love most about this book is the plot, because it has great pacing, it's super engaging to read, but I think the fact that it was a 4-star and not a 5-star for me is that the plot didn't always feel in service of the character development. Sometimes it felt plot to be plot and not for us to get to dissect and know the characters. Maybe I will think differently about that on a reread, because I've seen a lot of people say that what they really love is the character development in this book. It is emotional. I did tear up a few times. I never really full on cry with the book, but this book did hit me in the feels a couple of times. The characters, especially the side characters, I really loved. I really loved Joe, and I really loved the inhumanity of some characters and how that played with class. I thought this was beautifully done. This is to me an epiphany of a classic because it really holds up when you start thinking about things. This book definitely made me think. The last 100 pages, a lot of things happened and I didn't really love how certain characters were portrayed. So that is where it took away from the 5-star for me, but otherwise this would have been a 5-star. I would highly recommend reading Great Expectations, even if, like me, you're not the biggest Dickens fan. Another great October read was The Case of the Rebellious Susan by Henry Arthur Jones. This is a play. We follow Lady Susan and her friends as she finds out that her husband has had an affair, and instead of taking the advice of her friends and of the people around her to go the Victorian route and to just look past it because men will be men, she decides she wants revenge, and she decides she wants to have an affair as well to get back at her husband. This is a piece of new woman fiction which I used for the October prompt as well. It is comedy, it is funny, it is witty, it is a bit ridiculous at times. It's that kind of comedy where people make avoidable mistakes and discover each other's secrets. If you are a big fan of Oscar Wilde, I would recommend giving this one a go as well. Then my favorite October read was Cousin Phillis and Other Stories by Elizabeth Gaskell. This is a short story collection that's just is full of Victorian love. These are domestic, dramatic, short stories, and every single one of them expands almost a whole life of a group of people, and it's so wonderfully beautifully done. I had an amazing time with every short story. The novella I like least, which is Cousin Phillips, but the short stories I loved so much. I'm in love with Elizabeth Gaskell's short story writing because they were all incredibly emotional. It was such a dramatic, engaging, emotional experience, every short story. The short stories are full of romance, of family, of tragedy, and I think The Manchester Marriage, which I mentioned, might still be my favorite, as I think the tone of that short story was most modern. But Lizzie Lee is about a woman who searches for her daughter who she has lost, kind of. She's like a fallen woman. Her daughter is a fallen woman, and after the death of her husband, she decides she wants to find her daughter again, and just the emotions are unmatched in this book. To me, this is Elizabeth Gaskell at her best, and I will be recommending this a lot. So glowing 5-star, this is going to be all my favorites of the year for sure. The last, I think, classic? Yes, I think this is the last classic I read, and that is Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. I finally finished this. I think I started this early September, maybe even late in August. This was a tough read. Subject, writing, engagement level, everything about this was tough. We follow a man who calls himself the Invisible Man. We follow him when he is in school, and later as things start happening and he starts to move and he starts to get involved with certain people, but in every chapter there's this mini explosion of something that happens. He's in a different environment, and in every environment he is a stranger. He is alienated from everything around him. He is the Invisible Man. In that, it kind of feels like a fever dream, because I feel like in a lot of dreamlike writing, the main character, or you for that matter, don't fit in your environment. And this man, he has no character development in his narration, but he has character development in a way that he moves within these different places, because of course he changes, he learns things, but to us and through his eyes there is so much emptiness that you can barely feel him, which I think is so well done. But it makes for a really difficult read, because how can you read a book from a perspective that feels incredibly bare and empty and unengaging? I don't know this man at all, but the fact that I read 500 pages about a man like that is amazing. I am so impressed by that. The writing is gorgeous. The writing really does what it needs to do, and it felt like an incredibly unique reading experience. Often things that feel vague or feel like a fever dream are weird writing, a lot of different characters. They feel like chaos, but there is no chaos in this book. Chaos that is there because the situations where this character is in does feel chaotic and dangerous, very dangerous. You really feel it looming. There is no messiness in this book. It is so incredibly clean, because it's almost like the messiness kind of slips through. We can see that it is there, but we can never touch it. It's a very interesting novel, and we are going to discuss this on the 18th of November on Sarah's channel. And I'm really curious to see how the girls feel about this, because I can just imagine who will love it and who won't have loved it. I think I ended up giving this 4 stars because it definitely doesn't have that 5-star feel, because it was not enjoyable to read, but it was super interesting. So yeah, I'm glad I read this, but it was a big chore. I did actually read 2 more classics that I almost forgot about, because I read 2 Agatha Christie's, and while Agatha Christie is now really fun to me, I had a great time. I do think they're slightly forgettable because there are a lot of similarities within all the novels. One that I again read for the film, which apparently is something I did this month, is Halloween Party. I gave this one a 3.5 star. This is a Poirot book, and it is about a Halloween party, obviously, where a 12-year-old girl dies while apple bobbing. Yeah. It's very slow, very repetitive, very much Poirot, investigating and asking every single person the same questions. And I had a great time while listening to that. It was so relaxing. I didn't at all make an effort to guess what was going on. I think if I had, I would definitely have not enjoyed it that much, because I don't feel there was a whole lot of logic in this book. It became very absurd and ridiculous. I've heard people say who read a lot of Agatha Christie that this is definitely not one of her best ones. I can understand why, but again, this was my 2nd Agatha Christie I've read, so definitely an Agatha beginner. And then I decided, because I really had a good time, that I want to read another one, and I read one that I used for a vocabulary prompt, and that was By the Pricking of My Thumbs, which is the 3rd, I believe, Tommy and Tuppence, and I enjoyed Tommy and Tuppence so much. They are an elderly detective couple, and they investigate some mysterious stuff at the nursing home of their aunt. I really loved the writing in this one, because I liked the dynamic between the duo so much. Detective duo is such a fun idea, and it was very easy to follow. Again, I got the mystery completely wrong. I was really convinced that I got it right, but I got it wrong. I think if you're a more seasoned Agatha Christie reader, you kind of know what tools she uses and you can guess it. To me, it was fun that I got it wrong. I definitely felt a little bit more adventure and color in this one than I did in the previous one, because the characters also travel. I especially love Tuppence, who decides that she goes investigating on her own without her husband. Her curiosity definitely gets the better of her, and it was just a lot of fun. and this one I gave 4 stars. I read one non-fiction book this month. I have dipped in of other non-fiction, but I've not finished anything. But the thing that I did finish was The Five by Hallie Rubenhold, and this was another 5-star. Follow the 5 women who were presumably murdered by Jack the Ripper, but they still don't know exactly what happened. It's like unsolved cases, but that book is not at all about that. This is about their lives. So we follow them from childhood to adulthood, and we see how incredibly full their lives were. Hallie Rubenhold takes a lot of time to explain the Victorian era as well. So if we have like a working class woman, she explains what a working house was like and whether or not there are documents to prove that they were there. When I started reading this, I was so impressed by how she got all this information, but of course the police gathered all that information on these women and journalists as well, because it was like a hot topic at the time too. So she had a lot of information, but I really loved the context that she gave, because you can say this woman was really poor and went to the working house, but if you don't know the context of that and if you don't know what that meant in that time, it doesn't mean a whole lot to a modern reader. And Hallie Rubenhold really took her time to expand and explain around that. One of the things that was really interesting is that one of the women was a soldier's daughter, or yeah, I think he was a soldier, and they lived in soldiers' housing together with her mother and her brothers and sisters, and how that would have looked was really interesting to me as well. So not only have I learned something about the myth kind of around Jack the Ripper and about the kind of women that he killed, which is, the reality is very different than the myth. I also learned a lot about the Victorian era. I know that I'm late to the party of this book. I think it was a few years ago that everyone was reading this, but I want to say that it holds up, and I think it's important like that, because Jack the Ripper has become such a romanticized figure, and it's important to know that he actually murdered human beings and that he affected lives of lost ones. Really enjoyed this one. A book I had anticipated quite highly was a middle grade that is called Spellstone by Ross Montgomery. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Ross Montgomery is one of my favorite middle grade authors. This is about Evie, who is discovered by a group of magicians, and they tell her that she needs to find the Spellstone because someone evil is after the Spellstone, and Spellstone is like something that harbors magic. This one was a little bit disappointing to me. I didn't find the plot all that convincing. It was a little bit of a kind of middle grade where everything happens at once and it's just a big explosion, and somehow we are supposed to care, and it doesn't really feel very real. I think that is also a need that I have as an adult reader, and maybe a child wouldn't care that much. I did love the characters. Side characters were beautifully developed. Evie was beautifully developed, beautifully written, beautifully imagined, thought out. I think Ross Montgomery is amazing with characters. I just think the idea and the plot kind of missed some originality with this one. Another book that I found a little bit disappointing is the only romance I read this month, A Witch's Guide to Fake Dating a Demon by Sarah Hawley. This is the first book in, I don't know if it's a duology or a trilogy. I know that there's gonna be another book with characters that we've met in this book. We follow Muriel Spark, which very subtly into Muriel Spark, I will say. She is seen as a bad or weak witch because she doesn't have the type of talents that her family has. She is not very good at conjuring, and when she wants to bake something and conjure flowers, she accidentally conjures a demon. And when you conjure a demon, you have to make a deal, otherwise the demon cannot leave and needs to stay by your side. This book has a lot of romance tropes I would usually really like, which I think is why I did enjoy reading this. So we have forced proximity, we have somehow enemies to lovers, kind of, because of course they don't want to be in that forced proximity together. Sort of fake dating, because it becomes an element of fake dating that does work, but I think it only works because it's a little bit part of it and it's not the whole overall plot. And we have also a little bit of a case of insta love. If you know me and romance, you know I don't mind that, but I think a lot of people will dislike that about this book. It's the kind of book that you do enjoy, but looking from a distance is just not that good. Conversations, especially when you have the moments in romance where there's confrontation, it just didn't work. It didn't feel realistic. The chemistry between the characters was really good, and I also felt a little bit emotional towards the ending. I thought it was really heartfelt. So overall I would say this was fun, but I'm just not convinced. I will read, I think, the second book if I'm really in a mood for a witchy romance, but it's not something I will put on my TBR like actively. I don't think so. It's a good time, would not necessarily recommend this one. I read an adorable little graphic novel, a middle grade graphic novel called Garlic and the Vampire by Bree Paulsen. This is about a witch who turned her vegetable into living creatures and now they work on her farm with her. And then a vampire, after hundreds of years, or like 100 years I think, comes back, and the only one who can of course defeat him is Garlic. And it's really cute, but again, not that memorable, really a 3-star kind of feel. Then I read 2 literary fictions that I both really like. I read Untold Night and Day by Bae Suah, translated from the Korean by Deborah Smith. This was super weird, but in the best way possible. Saying that, I have forgotten most about this book, but that is because I think I finished it on the 1st of October, so it's been a while since I read it. But we follow a main character who works in an audio theater. So it is basically a theater where you listen to audio performances without seeing anything. So a lot of people who have vision impairments go there and enjoy theater that works for them. This theater is going to close, and on the last day, on the last evening, a lot of things happen, and we follow that evening, and she meets multiple people and she has interactions with them. But throughout the evening you start to wonder whether they're really different people or whether they're all the same, or whether she's hallucinating and talking to herself. It's so strange, it's so weird, and at the same time it really works. It talks about language and the different forms of language, how you can experience language. It was the kind of book that in the moment really made me think, but somehow it didn't stay with me incredibly much. I think I gave this 4 stars, and I did really love the writing, so I do want to read more by Bae Suah. I'm not sure who I would recommend this to. I think it's important that you like literary fiction, that you accept weird stuff, and that you like maybe not getting the answers, not knowing, but just having a really wonderful and crazy experience. The last book I read is a book that I got from NetGalley, and it comes out on the 14th of November, and that is a short story collection that's called So Late in the Day by Claire Keegan. And oh wow, I really love this. This collection has 3 short stories that Claire Keegan wrote over a long period of time. I think one is from the 90s and one is from 2022, and the other is somewhere in between. These short stories have, I think, as main theme, it's I think stories about men and women, about romantic relationships, and how misogyny is often at the heart of those relationships and stands in the way of those relationships as well. It is about romantic and sexual experiences, or experiences around romance and sex that don't have either of these elements but have the potential or have the feel of it. One of the short stories follows a man and the other 2 follow a woman. I kind of feel like they are about similar characters that just have different positions. The last one was my favorite, maybe because it was the easiest. It was the most scary, it was the most haunting story, because it's one of the stories where at the first page you know, oh, this isn't going to go well, and then you kind of get to experience what happens. Overall, the writing I really love. It's really easy to read, and it's one of those short stories that I really love. It's quite straightforward in the sense that we don't follow a massive amount of characters. We don't need all this outside information. We're just in someone's head. What I really liked about the middle story is that certain feelings were described that I could connect to so strongly. I was like, yes, I feel like this. And an example of that is when someone spontaneously says, "Can I visit you at your home today? We need to talk." And she says, "Well, I had actually planned to sit down all day and just do my thing." And then she's like, "You cannot come right now," because she's in her pajamas. She is in her own space. And she says, "Come tonight at 8. And then kind of her whole day is ruined because she knows the day isn't hers anymore. And then she's like, "I should have just told him, come in 5 minutes and put on a sweater, and then the day would have been mine again." I felt so deeply. I felt that so deeply. Even though that story didn't really grip me in any way, those descriptions I related to so strongly. I don't think any of these stories matched to the novel that she wrote last year, and of course I forgot the title, but I'm definitely a Claire Keegan fan. Yeah, that one comes out this month. I think I had an okay-ish reading month, maybe a little better than okay-ish, because I had 2 5-stars, so this is the stack of physical books that I have. I really made great use of my Kindle as well. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you had some fun listening to me talk about books. I hope you have a lovely day or evening, and I hope to see you in another video. Doei!